Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn, and today I have with me Omar Garcia. Omar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joel. A pleasure to be here.
We've been friends for how many years now? Five,
something like that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking time to come out on the show. For those that haven't met you, you've got your MBA and your engineering degree.
That is correct.
Mechanical engineering?
Mechanical engineering, yes.
Yeah, and started your career in Mexico, working for some big names. You've been involved in some M&A activities, billion-dollar type transactions that you're part of. Worked with some of the biggest consulting firms internationally even, and had a cool career. You know, love to hear you recap that here in a second, but I want to get into the last 15 plus years. You've been a business broker selling businesses, and that's kind of where I want to spend most of our time. Is some of the viewers may have businesses that they are thinking about selling or perhaps acquiring, and I'm sure you've seen the good and the bad and what goes well and what doesn't. Love to pick your brain about that a bit. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about your career and what got you here today?
Yes, thank you, Joel. Well, as you said, I started my career in FEMSA, which is a Mexican conglomerate, specifically in their beer division back in the 90s. We used to be the largest beer in Mexico back then. And once NAFTA was signed, the owners and the management team decided that it would be probably smart to have a joint venture with a U.S. brewer. And the sense was that we were pretty far behind in marketing. So that's what prompted everything. At that time, I was in a strategic planning role, and they put me into the selling process. So I started doing very basic stuff, and at the end, I was doing all the financial models and meeting with investment bankers and defending the models from the advisors that they had. So it was a really interesting process. It lasted 3 years. It got aborted 3 times. Miller was going to buy us 3 times, and at the end it didn't work out because they were being too aggressive with some of their demands. So that didn't pan out. At the end, we sold to Labatt's out of Canada. And and that whole process really enriched me professionally. I was like 26, 27, flying to Manhattan, meeting with investment bankers, J.P. Morgan, Morgan Stanley, with attorneys. We were in the Twin Towers having meetings. It was just incredible.
Fun ride.
Oh, it was awesome, yeah. Long hours, 16, 18 hours every day. It was nuts, but I learned a lot, yes.
Yeah. And then eventually you transitioned to the U.S.
Yeah, that same company, they told me, hey, we like you, we see tons of potential with you. We want you to go to either marketing or sales. I went to marketing, did a few years of brand management in Mexico as an associate brand manager, and then they offered me a position in the U.S. So in 1996, I got married, and my wife and I, we were sent as expats. We lived in Connecticut for 8 years. 4 of them working for the beer company as a brand manager for Tecate. That was our largest brand back then. Yeah.
And somewhere in your career, you ended up being on the cover of a magazine?
Yeah, so after we grew Tecate like 4 times, and profitability probably 10 times because we had a bunch of price increases. We repositioned the brand to the Hispanic market. Then I was approached by another large multinational from the UK, Cadbury Schweppes, and they had another Hispanic brand, which we repositioned, grew it significantly, increased significantly their profitability, and I ended up being one of the next generation marketers of the year. I think that was in 2003 or so, so that was like 20 years ago. Yeah. And my career was just going extremely well. I was growing. I had all these dreams of being a chief financial officer for one of the top consumer packaged goods companies in the world. I mean, things were working really well. I was offered to be the CMO for a company that we owned back then in France, and but we decided against that. One of my kids had some development issues, and my wife didn't want to add another third language to my daughter, so we decided to not do that. Yeah.
And that eventually led to you coming to Texas, right?
Yeah, so at some point we wanted to come closer to family, and I moved to work for Dr. Pepper, which was a sister company back then, and also in a Hispanic marketing role. I did that for about 3 or 4 years, and then I don't know, it might have been a middle-age crisis or something. I got an itch to start doing my own thing, and so I left them. Yeah.
So now you have a business brokerage. You're part of a large network of brokers.
Yep.
Your San Antonio, little old San Antonio office often ranks in the top of the brokers worldwide. I've fourth, fifth, first place. I mean, like you've got quite a success track record there, and then you're also a real estate broker, right? And so you've got. It sounds like you've had a lot of fun and been blessed with some good successes. So, as I mentioned earlier, you've literally sold. I think I've lost count, but I think you were somewhere around 150 businesses when we added it up a couple of years ago. And so I want to go there. When somebody's looking to sell a business, let's talk about the sell side first, and then if we have time, let's talk a little bit about the acquisition side. But there's literally hundreds of thousands of businesses in the U.S. The vast majority of those are under $1 million, under $2 million. Where, like, how small is too small to sell? Is there such a thing? Like, if I'm making 50, 60, 80,000 a year, should I even try to sell my business? And that's not your sweet spot. You deal with larger to mid-size, larger small companies. But what are some of the thoughts maybe that are in common for all businesses? Like, what should they be concerned about? What are the things you look for? Is a business healthy? Maybe that's the better question. What do you look for? What makes a healthy company? What makes a unhealthy candidate?
So when we started over 15 years ago, kind of the trend back then was to list many businesses and to sell a few. And I think it came from before the internet, because it will drive a lot of traffic of buyers. And then once you had them in the door, you'll sell them something. But now things have changed with the internet. So we have, as you said, we have become more selective with the businesses that we sell. We have been increasing our transaction size and the quality of the businesses that we represent. So what do we want to see in a business that we sell? I mean, it's a wide gamut, but I don't want to see a lot of concentration, client concentration. So that's something that professional buyers will not like, and it increases the risk of the business. So I got referral business not too long ago that they did fairly well, but in a naive way, the owner, to simplify his operation, pretty much grew up with one client. So, I mean, that was unsellable. No matter if I wanted to help him, there's nobody that's going to buy it unless he finances the deal. So that's something you want to steer away from. The other thing is, how dependent is the business on you? So years back, we had a business that it was non-destructive testing, and the seller had a PhD in a very technical area. So the business was extremely dependent on him. So that makes it difficult to sell. If you have older sales relationships, that might make it difficult. We could work around that, but buyers will be concerned, well, what happens after you go? Will they stick with me? So those are the things. So the more that you professionalize the business, the better. And then something else that we've seen is if the numbers, if they're messy, if they're not clean, then that'll be a problem too. We could work around that, but it's not ideal. The better systems you have, if you have a management team in place, if you don't have a lot of family, because that's another thing. Sometimes we see that there are 4 or 5 family members in the business. Well, what happens if they all leave? They get mad out of the new buyer. So that's a problem also when you're trying to sell it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So your first point was the number of customers.
Client concentration.
Have you seen like maybe this is industry dependent, but like a minimum number? Like if somebody has 7 customers or less, there's a high probability they're not going to be able to sell. Have you seen any trends like that?
Yeah, I mean,
or is it one customer 60% of your business?
I think that's more the issue. Okay. If you have like 50% of your business in 3-4 customers, then that could be a problem. And you might have 100 customers, right? That's the other 50%. But if you have concentration, like a big chunk of your business on a few, that's a problem. Now, there's some concentration that is not as bad, I guess. So they've been your client for 20 years, or you're the sole source for a product for them, right? Then, okay, we could work with that. But it's going to raise eyebrows. We got to work a little bit harder to find the right buyer, and we're going to have more pushback.
Do you, this you haven't mentioned yet, and I probably should have asked it first. Is there, if I wanted to sell my business tomorrow, that's probably not realistic.
No.
But is there kind of a sweet spot that's 6 to 18 months? Is it like, what do you see typically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a typical question that we get from sellers. The answer is, we don't know.
Okay.
But most of them fall in the 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
I mean, even if we had the buyer, if I had already the buyer, just getting the financing in place, getting the due diligence done, getting the contracts in place, that's going to be at least 90 days, or it could go all the way up to 120 days.
Yeah.
So that's the minimum. So we have to go out and find the right person, interview a lot of buyers or the right group. That's going to take us at least 2 to 6 months, depending on the business. Yeah.
So if I do the math on that real quick, we're talking 5 to 9 months kind of is a pretty good pace.
Yeah. And the bigger the business, the more complexity. So
right.
Yeah.
Going back to the points you made earlier, you said if there's too many family members in the business, that could be a detractor from a future buyer. Does that always count against a business, or have you ever seen it kind of work for the business?
I mean, it depends on the size of the business and how many employees they have. But I mean, if dad is the CEO and the main owner, and then his daughter is the CFO, his son is a sales guy, then quality is another son, you sell it. Well, what happens if one of them gets mad at you as a new buyer? Will they all leave? I mean, that's kind of the risk.
Maybe you have different level of expectations.
Yeah, or you don't know
they
if
lose the flexibility they used to have, whatever.
Exactly. They might have perks that you don't know about,
perks,
yeah. And it might be that they don't work on Fridays, or they have some flexibility that other people don't. So, yeah, it tends to raise eyebrows. So, or if you get rid of one of them that is not good, well, what happens with the other ones? Will they be concerned?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You see the market, the economy the way it is right now, which in real estate and residential real estate, there's a buyer's market and there's a seller's market. How would you describe the small, say the $2 million to $50 million business market right now? Is it in favor of the sellers or in favor of the buyers, or is there such a thing in those transactions?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have told me 3 years ago that we're going to have the rates that we have right now, I would have been really, really concerned. But the reality is that the market has behaved in a way that I didn't expect. So on the smaller side of the spectrum, which are mainly the SBA loan deals that tend to be from $1 million to $6, $7, we've seen a lot of demands. There's just a lot of buyers out there. Kind of became trendy among Gen Zs to buy business. So now you hear that instead of wanting to go work for Goldman Sachs, they want to be painters, they want to be plumbers, they want to be part of a community and be there for a long, long time. So that's something relative new. It wasn't like that 5-10 years ago.
Interesting.
So, yeah, so we have that. And then on the bigger businesses that are from 10 to 50 million, you have a lot of interest from both private equity and from strategics or other companies in their same industry that want to grow through acquisition instead of organically. Despite that money's not as cheap as it used to be, I mean, there's just a lot of money out there and a lot of interest. Yeah.
That's. Have you seen that? Have you seen that condition any time in your previous 15 years of doing this?
No.
So this is fairly unique.
Yeah, I would say private equity became a thing for deals on their smaller scale, like the one to, not the one, but EBITDA of 1 million to 2, probably 5-6 years ago. Before that, they were too small for them. Yeah.
Interesting. Is it because, I assume it's because they see those businesses as profitable, otherwise they wouldn't do it, or is it just they're getting better returns than they're getting at the bank? So,
well, yeah, I mean, their mantra is to double, triple their money in 4 to 6 years. So yeah, they're getting very good return. And some of these deals, they tend to be bolt-on acquisitions, so they already have a platform. So the smaller ones, they have a lot of synergies. So they make money short-term on them, yeah.
You probably lose contact pretty quickly after the sale, I would imagine. Do you have any feel for how much impact the private equity, I'm not trying to make anybody a bad guy here, but if a PE group buys a company versus an individual buys a company, do you have any feel for what that does to the culture?
Yeah, and I don't, we in that sense, we're fairly transactional, right? But the PE groups tend to be more aggressive and cash flow focused and objective focused because their investors are demanding a return, and management has been hired to deliver that return. So that's kind of their North Star. That's what they're chasing, those big objectives. Yeah, so if it's an individual or if it's another strategic, although everyone wants to make more money, they might not have the drive that the private equity guys have, or the pressure.
And how they achieve it, right?
Yeah, well,
with the sacrifice of people versus, so do you run into sellers that how it's sold and who it's sold to matters?
From time to time, yeah. From time to time, we run into sellers that are like, I'd rather sell to an individual, yes, or I would like to see the culture of my company be retained, or certain aspects of the business
do you think
retained.
Has your experience been that that's a more common conversation recently, or has it been about the same or gotten less that sellers care about those things?
Well, with the advent of private equity into the smaller deals, I mean, yeah, you hear that from time to time. I wouldn't say that it comes up in every conversation that we have, but it does show up, I would say, 1 in 10, 1 in 20. It's like, I would rather sell to somebody in the industry rather than private equity, for example.
Okay. So before we move into on the buyer side of things, just real quick, if I were bringing a business to you, and I guess it's kind of 2 lines of thought or 2 lines of questioning. How would I pick a broker? Like, what am I looking for? Because you also probably hear people, just like you do in residential, I don't need a real estate agent. I can sell my house on my own. Well, you could, and people do. But generally working with a real estate agent to sell your home, you're going to sell it faster. It's going to be a simpler transaction. You don't have to be directly involved in every single conversation with the potential buyer. So there's benefits of having a real estate agent involved. You don't necessarily want to pay the commission, but in the grand scheme of things, you probably get more money. You're going to sell it faster, and it's going to be a more pleasant transaction than if you try it on your own. Does any of that translate over into the business side?
Yeah, I mean, yes, of course. I mean, we run into sellers that they have tried to sell the business themselves, and it takes forever because they have the wrong attorneys. The right expectations weren't laid out from the beginning. For example, I mean, I don't know how, I just talked to one not too long ago, and they were doing contracts, and all of a sudden they were talking about seller financing 70%, and he didn't want to do that. Then why did you move to contracts if the basics of the deal were not in place? I don't know. And now his key employee knows that the business is for sale. We will never have allowed that. So buyers never talk to our employees or the employees of our sellers until the very, very last, once everything is signed, and then the check is about to hit the bank account, right? Yeah. So there are things like that, and in those occasions, they tend to have one buyer. The reality is that if you have one buyer, you don't have any buyers because you have no leverage power. I mean, we talk to 50, 60, 80, 100 buyers before we sell a business. So we're interviewing all these people. We're making sure that they have the resources. We're making sure that they can get it done. And in many occasions, we present more than one buyer, more than one offer. We try to make them compete. Yeah, we're working for the seller.
So if I were looking for a broker, what 1 or 2 things should I ask, or what 1 or 2 things should I look for to kind of help me pick a good broker versus maybe not a good broker? And maybe they're all saints in your industry. I don't know. But
no, yeah. Joel, that's a really good question. And I mean, I could talk about ourselves. I don't want to
would you say
diminish anyone.
Yeah, would you say it's track record matters? Would you say like chemistry matters?
Oh, definitely chemistry matters, but I think experience matters. I think that if you see what they sold and what they have for sale, it's going to give you an idea of the type of business that they manage. There are a lot of good talkers, but they not necessarily know what they're doing. In this business, you have to be a little bit of a shrink, a little bit of a financial guy, and a little bit of a sales guy. Some of them might be too much of a sales guy. Some of them might be too much of a finance guy. They can't get the deal done because they're stuck in the numbers. So you got to be really flexible. And experience really, really count because there's no 2 deals alike. They're all very different. The more you're doing this and the longest you've been doing it, the more expertise you have because you've seen more things. So
yeah. Last question for this episode, I think. I really want to kind of dive into the buyer side. And I know that's not the side you work, but you interact with a lot of them. Maybe we split that off into a separate future episode. If I were coming to you today, I've interviewed a handful of brokers. I took into consideration what you just said, and I've narrowed it down to, I think I want to work with you, or we'll say you. What do I need to be prepared to answer or give you? Like, what's that short checklist of things I need to be prepared to discuss or present?
Yeah, so, I mean, the first thing we would do is give you a confidentiality agreement. So you know that any conversation that you and I have or you have with my team is confidential. Then we would request 3 years and year-to-date of financial statements.
Okay.
We will recast them to estimate the cash flow of the business. In essence, how much money is the business generating to you as an owner?
Mm-hmm.
Once we have that, and we typically need the help of the owner for that, because he would know what perks he's taking. After that, we would do an estimate of value. So we'll tell you, we think your business is worth $5 million, whatever the number is, $20 million. And if we agree, then we would sign a representation agreement where you give me the authority to go out and market your business in a confidential manner and talk to buyers and bring you offers. Okay? So that's kind of the process.
So if my financials are a mess, should I talk to you at all, or should I get them cleaned up first?
I wouldn't mind talking to you. Let's see what we could do with what you have. But yeah, if it needs some fixing, we could work with you on that. Yeah.
And your experience in the field, is there any, like, I shouldn't even talk to a broker if I'm not making at least some number per year, whether that's revenue number or profit number, or and is there any kind of?
That's a difficult question, because, I mean, every business can be sold. The problems are the expectation. If you're making 50 grand, I mean, you could almost work at McDonald's and make 50 grand. So can't expect a lot of money for that business, right? If you're making $1 million a year, then your multiple might be 4 times. Let's pick a number. If you're making $2 million, multiple might be 5 times, 4.5, 5. It also depends in the industry, and it depends on all the other factors, client concentration, growth, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But everything is sellable. I mean, if it's too small, we wouldn't touch it, because it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy.
Right.
So, yeah.
Speaking of time and energy, in our conversations over the years, don't a lot of brokers, and maybe you're one of them, charge for those initial consultations or those initial?
Yes, a lot of brokers charge some initial fees, and we don't. We've taken the approach that we want to be tied to the hip to the seller and have the less friction possible. So they will give us the opportunity to review the numbers, prepare an opinion of value, show them how professional we are. And we think that if we have a fee, although we should be able to charge it.
With your success record, you probably could.
Yeah, but I think not having that fee facilitates for that to happen.
Good. For this episode, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage any potential seller to talk to multiple brokers, see what they've done. They might have a presentation, but also to talk to some of their past clients and, get a sense for who the person is. Because at the end of the day, a lot of it is not only expertise, but is he the right person for you? I mean, we don't pressure our sellers. We advise them. We tell them, hey, we think this is a good deal. But at the end, they have to make that decision. It's not us. So just see what the other guys, how they're working, and what their style is.
Yeah, great. Well, Omar, thank you. That's quite informative. Appreciate your time. And definitely have you back for a future episode. thinking maybe we'll talk about the buyer side of the transaction. So
Sounds good. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.